This is probably my all-time favorite passage. Now, I'm honest with you when I tell you that I don't like a passage and it was hard and difficult and I had to go, but this one, not so. It is one of my all-time favorite passages to think about, to talk about. There's so many different things going on here. John is weird. It's not one of those passages where you just want to hand this to somebody who's like brand new to and it's like, here you go, read this stuff. But really, if you're like brand new to the Bible, to the faith, the gospel stories, Luke is what you want to go after. Because Luke writes more like how we read. We read as though, we read it's like, okay, tell me what happened, who was there, how many, like very historical, factual minded. Luke does that. He actually says that right in the beginning of his gospel. He's like, I'm trying to write an account for you, Mr. Theophilus. So that's what he says. John ain't trying to do that. John is using more imagination and more poetry. I mean, he opens with a poem. We got to look at that first passage, or the first Sunday of John. So John is not trying to give you a chronological, historical account. John's doing something entirely different. And if we're going to read it properly, we got to put that whole historical lens, that whole tell me exactly how it happened and who was there. We got to put that on the shelf for a minute so we can actually try and engage with what John's actually trying to say. So here's our You Are Here marker. We're in Epiphany. We started Kairos time back in Advent, and we are moving around. It ends with Pentecost and the Ascension of Christ in June, like first Sunday of June, somewhere in there. So we are journeying that way. And Epiphany is this season of light, and it's the season of revelation. It's the season where the wise men find Jesus. It's the season where the nature of God is being revealed to everyone. And this passage here has a really large part to play in Epiphany because there's a revelation happening about who Christ is, and not just who Christ is, but what Christ says he's going to do. So one of my favorite theologians, her name's Diana Butler Bass, she said this: Epiphany is best expressed through paint and poetry and imprecise preaching. I love that part. Imprecise preaching. It is the delight of theologians of imagination and children playing in the snow. That is what Epiphany is all about. So if we are going to tackle the passage of John today, we need to think like a child. We need to have imagination. We need to engage a different part of us than just to tell me how it went. Tell me the factual, historical, because John is not trying to do that. A lot of theologians who will only read the gospel that way are confused by John. They don't know what to do with it. If you ever notice, the clearing of the temple happens as one of the last things that Jesus does in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But in John, it happens right away. This is the next passage after this one. He walks into Jerusalem and clears the temple. And so a lot of people who only think in that historical, linear kind of thing are like, well, he must have done it twice, which he wouldn't have survived it twice. So you got to use imagination here. He's not trying to give you a chronological, historical, factual account of everything that happened. He's doing something else entirely. And one of the things that he's doing is in this book, he gives you 7 signs. He calls them signs. We call them miracles, but he calls them signs. So Jesus did 7 signs in John. This is the first sign of 7. And each one builds on another until we get to the final one. And so it's supposed to, and I've done like a dive into that. We're not going to go into all 7. They're fun to really like dive into, but we're just going to look at this first one. This is the very first sign that Jesus does. So I thought I would give you 7 signs as well. I'm going to do 7 signs here for you. Are you ready? Here's the first sign. Beware of car-eating cows. I think that's what that means. I don't know. We're trying to read this sign and figure out, if you saw this on the road, what would you think is up ahead? Some kind of carnivorous cow? Something that eats, like, what is the sign saying to us? That's what signs are for. They tell you something. Jesus is doing 7 signs. So there's our first sign. I don't know what it means, but we got to use some imagination, obviously. Maybe it is, I don't know. Okay. Here's second sign. Okay, this one's really interesting. You've got to follow the arrows here. Bikes are supposed to yield to bears and pedestrians. Pedestrians are supposed to yield only to bears, but not to bikes. And bears yield to no one, because they're wild animals. So I think that one's kind of clear. We get that one, right? Okay, that's the second sign. Here's my third sign. That one's pretty clear. Beware of the invincible moose. He I guess he destroys cars, and cars cannot destroy him. It even says down there, invincible moose, next 5 kilometers. So if you're driving on this road and you see a moose, you better look out. That's what this sign is trying to tell us. Beware of invincible moose. The moose, that might be multiple, because it's not meese, right? Like geese. A goose is a geese, but a moose and a moose. Maybe it's a whole herd of invincible moose, and it's plural and not just singular. Oh Lord, this one just elevated. You see how we can use some imagination and read into signs? Notice this one. Don't know what that one means. It's just a car in the air. I don't see a ramp. I don't see any levitation devices. I don't see nothing. I don't know what this sign means. Does anybody have a guess? Unlevel road. Unlevel road? Invisible road. Invisible hill. Maybe. We don't know what that one means. It's just a car on, 33-degree angle? Doing something. I don't know. Doesn't even tell us what's going on there. And then there's this one. Good luck. Oh, if I saw that, I just might, especially in a city, heart attack. So that one actually says good luck. So that's what it means. Good luck if you want to try and figure out this next intersection. Best of luck to you. Okay, that was our 5th sign. 6th sign. Actual one. I don't know if you can see that from where you're at, but it is beware of falling cows. There are boulders and cows falling on that car. That's what that little black spot with legs going up in the air like this, that's a cow. Actual sign. Beware of falling cows. I don't know why they just don't put a fence up there. Right? You farmers, you have cows, you put fences up? Who knows? We don't know. This sign's not giving us. Okay, our 7th and final sign that I will perform for you today. That is an elephant. Do not haul elephants in a truck bed. You cannot haul elephants in a truck bed on this road. That is against the law. Pretty straightforward, right? Except when you start questioning, why would you have an elephant in a truck bed? I don't know. Why did they need to make that sign? You ever see one of those signs and you're like, that's a really weird sign, but they made it for a reason, so there must have been that one idiot that did the thing that then called, well, we got to put up a sign now because someone was there. Okay, so those are my 7 signs. I'm sure there's more signs out there that you could find that are fun. And now get on to the first sign that Jesus has for us. And it's probably his most well-known miracle. If you go up to any person on the street and you say, name a miracle that Jesus did, there's probably 2 that are just going to pop out. Walked on water, turned water to wine, right? Those are like the 2 that are just like boom, boom. We know those 2. So this is a very popular, well-known one. This miracle doesn't occur anywhere else in the Bible. It's not mentioned anywhere else by anyone else. Paul doesn't say anything about it. Matthew, Mark, Luke, they don't say anything about it. It's only mentioned in John. So that's really interesting. Some fun facts for you. But this fits into Epiphany because there is a revelation taking place about the nature of God inside of this miracle. It's not just that Jesus can do cool parlor tricks or party tricks. That would be a cool party trick, though. Show up and turn all the water in the place to wine. That would be a fun party trick. You would be the life of the party if you could do that, I'm sure. But that is not what this is trying to communicate. There's something else going on here. There's lots and lots of Jewish roots in this miracle that we get to dive into and kind of look at, and there's a lot of stuff being said. But it fits into Epiphany because Epiphany is this season dedicated to awakenings, because we need these things, these aha moments, to keep our faith from becoming a fossilized thing of the past, but a very present reality, something that is moving and shaping and guiding us. And it's like this whole evolution in our hearts that's taking place. And Epiphany is this recurring season every year that helps us have more awake. We make space in the liturgical year for epiphany moments and awakenings and broadening of our minds and our hearts, which I think is really, really awesome. So now, diving in, we're going to talk about some wine. Now, growing up fundamentalist, we didn't like this miracle very much because we weren't allowed to drink. So what do you do with a passage where Jesus actually makes alcohol? You know what they do with this passage? They just say it was grape juice. That's what they say. Growing up, that was it. Well, it wasn't wine. It was actually just a form of grape juice. But you know that grape juice wasn't even invented until the Prohibition in America in the 1920s? And this pastor, who was also a doctor by the last name of Welch, decided that churches needed non-alcoholic communion options because you can't have alcohol in church when you're practicing prohibition in the 20s. And so what do you do with communion when everyone's like taking wine right there? You're not supposed to take wine because that's against God's laws somehow. Just happened in the 20s, by the way. But they needed an unfermented wine. So Dr. Welch made this thing called Dr. Welch's unfermented wine that then churches could use for communion as a non-alcoholic option. You can still buy this in the store as called Welch's grape juice. That's the reason that we have grape juice, is because churches needed non-alcoholic communion options. So that's the whole thing. But this becomes a problem for fundamentalists saying they just turned it into grape juice because grape juice wasn't invented yet until 1920-something. So what is going on here? Jesus is turning water into wine. That seems like a pretty cool thing to do. Let's dive into this thing and see what's going on. It says, on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Okay, that's a problem. We have a problem, not just because parties need alcohol. This is verses 1 through 3, by the way. Fun fact here, real fun fact. Mary is never named in John's gospel. She's always referred to as the mother of Jesus or the woman. So this is really interesting. Now, it sounds a little bit like, why call her the woman? There's a very interesting thing we're going to dive into. But let's talk about a wedding running out of wine. This isn't a good deal. This is not a good deal. Ancient Near Eastern weddings were multi-day parties, like 5 to 7 days long. Now remember, you have small communities, and these small communities are made up of 5 to 10 families. That there's a patriarch of the family, and then marries daughters off to other families, and then invites daughters into the family to marry the sons, and then you just build on to the family house, and it becomes a large structure. They run a family business, and then the business trades with other people. So like you're in charge of sheep, they're in charge of leather, it's a whole economy all built into a small little place. So when one of the people in this town got married, the entire town showed up to the wedding because everybody knew one another and they traded with one another and they needed one another. So it's a big deal. So if you're marrying someone into the family, you need to the community needs to welcome them in. So it is a big, huge deal to get married in these days. A whole week-long worth of feasting and eating and drinking and all this. And you can kind of see that in later on. It's like, usually you serve up the good wine first and everyone gets all schnookered, and then you hand out the watered down stuff later, but you save the good stuff for now. You can see that right in the beginning. This is what weddings are all about in the ancient Near East. Lots of wine, lots of food, especially meat. They had lots of meat, and that's not something you always had because we didn't have a way to preserve it and refrigerate it back then in the day. So fresh meat was not a very common commodity. So lots is a big celebration. Having a wedding run out of wine would be like you attending a birthday and there's no cake. And you're like, "Where's the cake?" "What do you mean cake?" "Well, we're out of cake. They didn't have the cake." And you're like, "Well, what are we going to blow out the candles on? We'll just put it in the spaghetti." That's not the same thing, right? You need a cake there with candles in it to sing happy birthday, and then they blow out the candles. It's just standard birthday practice. If you go to a birthday and there's no cake, you're like, what's wrong here? Or the whole wedding ceremony where the bride and the groom, they cut the cake together and then they cut a piece out and then they smash it in each other's faces. Maybe you've seen that, maybe you've done that. We went light. I just kind of wiped a little bit of frosting on my wife's nose at our wedding. It was just boop. So this kind of like that deal. If you're at the wedding and they're like, well, where's the cake? It's like, oh, we didn't really do a cake, or we forgot about the cake. You'd just be like, what is going on? But it's even more serious at this point, because wine is not just the thing that helps you kind of loosen up and have fun at the party. Wine is the thing that is very symbolic. One of my favorite movies of all time, because as my favorite actor of all time, Jimmy Stewart, It's a Wonderful Life, when they're welcoming the Rotini family into their new home, there's a gift of salt and bread and wine. And you can hear him say, wine is a symbol of joy and life and prosperity. And that's kind of like a little ceremony that he did for the Rotini family, Martini family, as they walked into their new house. But wine was very symbolic. It symbolizes joy, it symbolizes life, it symbolizes prosperity. And if you have no wine at your wedding, you're basically saying, we're going to run out of joy, we're going to run out of life, we're going to run out of prosperity as our couple. You will be remembered in that community forever and ever and ever as that one couple. They're probably not very happy because they didn't have wine at their wedding. Or they ran out of wine at their wedding. It's a bad omen kind of a thing. Like they just would think that was bad luck. What was going on with that? Something is not smiling down upon that. They would perceive it, this is a bad sign, because that symbol of wine is not there. That comes from actually a passage in Isaiah that we're supposed to remember when we read this, but we don't if we're not very familiar with Isaiah. Here's a really long passage, but I've got underlined sections. Now, Isaiah 24 is about life in the current state that they're in, and it's not very good. And it says this, the earth lies polluted under its inhabitants, for they have transgressed laws, violated the statutes, broken the everlasting covenant. That's what Isaiah is telling about the people of God of his day. It's like, this place is in shambles because of y'all. Therefore, a curse devours the earth, and its inhabitants suffer for their guilt. And then the next word, the wine dries up. Oh, that's a big deal. The vine languishes, all the merry-hearted sigh. No longer do they drink wine with singing. Strong drink is bitter to those who drink it. There is an outcry in the streets for lack of wine. All joy has reached its eventide. The gladness of the earth is banished. So this is kind of like, this is what Jesus is coming to address. Is this earth lies under a curse of death. That's what they believed as a people. Like Adam and Eve sinned, introduced death into creation, and now that's really the bad part of everything. And so Isaiah symbolizes this with this phrase, the wine dries up. The wine, no longer do they drink wine. There's an outcry in the streets for lack of wine. This whole lack of wine is a symbolic thing for this state of the earth under the curse of sin and death. That's the whole symbol. So here we have a wedding that has no wine, and we're supposed to remember this phrase. So now they become a little microcosm of this theological thought. Now we're thinking imaginatively and theologically, not necessarily historically and factually. So we got to get into the realm of imagination. This is the story that they tell themselves about themselves. And so this wedding with no wine is a big problem, but it's also starting to symbolize the greater problem that the earth faces, this problem of sin and death. And John is saying that Jesus is coming to eradicate sin and death from the earth. And so this wedding is the very first sign that shows us what Jesus is up to. So the lack of wine and joy under this whole place, that's the microcosm of what John is saying theologically Jesus is coming to address. Who would have known that? Just like, oh, there's no wine at the wedding. That's a bummer. But Jesus fixed it. Now everyone's happy again. Let's move on to the next sign, right? But if you don't dive into what John is trying to say theologically, we just kind of like miss it. And we don't understand it. Now, this is the next part. We're going to talk about the woman. We're like talking about wine and women today. Isn't that nice? So wine, now the woman. And Jesus said to her, woman, What concern is that to me and to you? Now, if I would have said that to my mom back in the day, I would have got smacked upside the head. My hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. This is a weird phrasing. This is really odd phrasing because it sounds derogatory in our modern day context. But there's, again, we have to think theologically. What is happening? There's a lot of symbolism in John. There's a lot of this means that. It's pointing back to this. You can think of it like a Wikipedia page. If you've ever been online and you're looking up Wikipedia, and some of the words are blue with underlines. They're hyperlinks. And you click on the hyperlink and you're like, oh, there's this whole page that describes what this phrase means. That's what John is like. Except we don't have the hyperlinks. We have to just know in our head. Like, so when he talks about woman, or he talks about wine drying up, there's no wine at the wedding, that's a hyperlink back to Isaiah 24. We're like, okay, know that. When there's, the word woman should be a hyperlink in the Bible. You click on it, where's it going to take you? Anybody guess? Anybody guess? Remember Genesis? All the way back in Genesis, we have the first man and the first woman. Remember their names? Adam and Eve. Do you know what that means in Hebrew? Man and woman. Nice and simple, right? It's like, I've created a man. His name will be man. I've created a woman. Her name will be woman. That's really what Adam and Eve mean in Hebrew. It's just man and woman. So it's really interesting. They're very generic. John, referring to Jesus' mother as woman, is supposed to get our minds hyperlinked back to Genesis. What's going on here? Okay, I like this passage here. There's Mary and there's Eve, and there's a whole lot of cool symbolism going on in this painting. You can look at that while I talk about some things. Woman is the name of Eve. First woman, just a woman. Mary is called woman in this passage. So we're supposed to go back in our minds to Genesis and be like, okay, we're talking Adam and Eve kind of stuff. Man is the name of Adam. Adam means man, right? Is Jesus ever called the man in John? Yes, he is. Remember when Pilate presents him to the crowd before his crucifixion? He says, behold the man. We're supposed to hyperlink back to Adam. So here we have kind of like a little microcosm going back to Adam and Eve. What is going on here? What is John trying to get our imaginations to do here? A couple ideas. John uses Mary symbolically in his writings to emphasize her as a new Eve, a second Eve. We see Paul doing that with Jesus, saying he's a second Adam. Like Adam, under this Adam, kind of the world fell apart and sin and death was introduced. Under this second Adam, now we have life and healing and resurrection and all that stuff brought into. So there's second Adam. Mary is supposed to be this new Eve giving birth to a new people of God. Mother of a new creation. That's all happening. In Genesis 3, Eve offered forbidden fruit to Adam. Like, this is a very popular phrase. That's been used derogatorily towards women for a long, long time. But if we were to pay attention, that there is a redemptive turn in Mary, in a very patriarchal society, who initiates the second Adam, Christ, in the ministry. This is the very first thing he does. And so while Eve turns to Adam and says, here, eat this fruit, and then Adam does, Mary turns to Jesus and says, hey, there's no wine. We're going to do something about this. And Jesus then is initiated right into his ministry through this second Eve figure. That is like mind-blowing stuff going on in this passage. We have a whole new creation. This is why we don't hand John to beginners. Like, John is not the beginner's stuff. There's lots of stuff going on in here. A couple other thoughts. Mary is the second woman birthing a new creation, a new people of God through her action here, and the new servants of God are back and do whatever he tells you. That's what Mary says to the servants there. Well, lots of symbolism there. Can't go into that. At the crucifixion, she will be present standing with the disciple of John, who symbolically represents the people of God going forward, and the two are given charge and care for one another. Behold your son, behold your mother. And second, somehow this tragic moment and its resurrection and redemption is illustrated in what happens next. This is crazy. Water is turned into wine. Right? This is the big, this is like the big climax of the story. We have here, well, that didn't turn out right. It looks different here, I promise you. Oh, I hear you. It totally looks different here. I'm going to have to contact technical support of this program. So basically what happens, I'll sum this up for you. There's 6 water basins that are empty. That's weird. First thing, that's weird. Jesus turns to the servants and says, fill those up all the way. Where are they going to get that water from, right? There's a well. There obviously has to be a well. That's where you get water from. You don't just turn on the spigot. They don't have running water. So they go to a well, they pull out some water, they fill up these stone basins all the way to the beginning, or all the way to the brims. And then Jesus says, now draw again and take it to the MC, Master of Ceremonies. That's what happens. And the Master of Ceremonies takes it, and now it's wine. Really interesting stuff going on here. Now, I've always assumed that the water in the basins was turned to wine. They pull some out. Here you go. Something different's going on here. Now, there's six religious water pots, and they're empty. This is weird. Can you imagine if you invite a whole bunch of people to your house for a party and you shut off the water? How are they going to wash their hands, right? Now, washing our hands is just merely hygienic for us, but it's religious for them. They have religious laws around washing their hands. They can't do that at this party. Who in their right mind is going to forget to fill up the religious washing basin so that they can religiously wash their hands? That'd be like forgetting to say the all shall be well prayer or something here in church. Like, wait, we skipped something. That's essential to what we do here, or the Lord's Prayer at the end. What do you mean we're skipping that part? We need to do that part. That's what we do. So the religious pots are empty. That shouldn't have been. But that's also really weird, so we got to take it as a sign. 6 is the Hebrew number for incomplete or imperfection. 7 is the number for God. 6 is the number of humanity who is not quite God. So in their minds, 6 is like an incomplete number. So here, these pots are representative of their entire religious system thus far, from Genesis all the way up to Malachi, and now Jesus is here. Now, it's incomplete. It's never finished. It wasn't good enough to do what it needed to heal the world. Their religious system, it was like empty. And it says this, when human religion is uncovered as just another broken system, like a political or economic one, that keeps enslaving a majority to establish powers within it for a few, it reveals they're empty of life. So Jesus is making a statement of where their religion has gone to this point and how they've organized themselves. And he's making a very bold statement here, is what John is doing. He's saying this whole temple system that we have rotated our lives around has become an abusive system, and it's void of any kind of life. We can't become clean here through this thing. That's like, whoa. So that's a statement Jesus makes, or John makes, with these stone basins being empty. Then he's like, fill them up. So it fills them up all the way to the top. Why would he fill them up all the way to the top? Well, they need to be full. So he takes all this well water, and they keep pouring it into these basins. They hold 30 gallons apiece times 6. That's a lot, 180 gallons. You imagine 180 gallons. It takes a while to fill up 180 gallons. So they fill these all the way to the top. Jesus says, draw again. Now, where was the water drawn from? That's the thing. If you look at the Greek, it doesn't actually tell you. So there's two ideas here. From the basins, and the water in the basins transformed into wine, or the well itself was transformed into wine. 2 options. Now they both have their interesting thing. Now the basins were filled to the brim with water. We know this fact. The religious system of the first covenant has run its course. Can't fit any more water in these things. We're done. This whole temple system of worship that is now in collusion with Rome and oppressing most of the people, that's full to the brim. You can't fit any more abusive religion in those pots. And it's just water, and it's not going to do what we want it to do. From that same well that gave the water to fill those basins up, now he's like, draw again, and out comes wine. So there's a really fascinating thing going on here. The well of God is serving up something new. So it's the same source that gave them all that they had up to this point, but now something new is happening. Supposed to bring our minds back to Isaiah 25. That says, on this mountain, when God comes to fix everything, on this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wines, of rich food filled with marrow, well-aged wines strained clear. And he will destroy on his mountain the shroud that is cast over all peoples. He will swallow up death forever. So this water to wine miracle sign is pointing back to Isaiah 25. And Jesus is saying, how we're running things right now looks a lot like Isaiah 24. But now God is doing something entirely different in me, and now that well is producing wine and not just water. There's bringing their minds back to Isaiah 25. Something new is about to happen. It was never about the stone basins. That's the thing. It was never about the stone basins, but the well that is God and producing something. So when your basins of life seem empty, go back to the source of their filling for something new. This is what Jesus is telling us. You ever have something that just kind of runs its course and you're like, wow, this is not for me anymore. Something is just not working anymore. And you're like, I need something different. I need something new. And you don't just throw entire life out the window, right? You go back to the source. You go back to the source of life, which is God, and say, what is now coming into my life? So God is the source of all life, the wellspring of life. And you know what? Sometimes things run dry. Things just like, this is boring, or doesn't work anymore, it doesn't make sense anymore. And then we just kind of like, oh, I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know how to handle this. I don't know. And we go back to the source. We don't go to the basins again. We don't go to the old ways and thinkings and all that kind of stuff and say, well, can this change? Is there something new going to come out of this? Sometimes everything needs to change. Sometimes you just need that whole holy reset on your life, right? And so this water to wine scenario, there's a theological statement about how Jesus is going to come and actually defeat the main enemy that all humans face, and that is death. And saying, I've transformed death into a gateway of more life on the other side of it. John is saying that theologically, but for us today, how can we apply this to our life in the present? One, we don't have to fear death, but two, sometimes those small deaths that we do face, the death of how we used to be, the death of a vision or a dream, or something that was giving us life that no longer is, sometimes that death there, we're like, well, I guess that's all done. I'm all done, there's nothing left here. But sometimes we have to go through the death to experience a resurrection. Sometimes we have to walk through the death of something old to experience something new on the other side. And we don't have to be afraid of the death process. Dying is really hard, by the way. Dying is the hard part. Death is easy. It just kind of happens. It's a moment. You're here, then you're gone. The dying part is hard because you have to release how you used to be, how you used to think, how you used to function in this world, and values that you once held that just seem like old and stale, and you have to rethink your entire life sometimes. And this passage here tells us that God is the source of all life, and you go back to this source to find new life. Because sometimes when you've just been getting water for a while, and you're like, that's run its course. These basins are full. I guess I'm done. You can go back to the source, which is God, which is life, which is love, and find something new. Like, well, now that I've returned, it's not the same old water that it was. Something new is coming out of this. Something that's a little bit more flavorful. Something that's a little bit more fun. Something that's a little more life-giving. So this whole passage, there's lots and lots and lots of places we can take this, but we're not going to today because that is good enough. So today I will leave you with a reflection question and a practice to try this week to figure it out. So reflection question 1, what new wine am I experiencing in life right now? Or what old water am I afraid to let go of? There's a reflection question to think about this week. And the spiritual practice is not going to sound very spiritual, but it is. Break routine and do something fun and unexpected this week. Oh, some of you that really like your routine might find this one hard, and that's why it's a spiritual practice. But break that routine and do something fun and unexpected and interesting this week and see what happens. Spiritual practice it is, yes. All right, our Psalm 36 by Malcolm Guite is our, hopefully it's okay, good. As pilgrim souls on whom your light is shone, let us leave judgment to your tender mercy and turn instead to you. Keep pressing on towards the steadfast heights, the mountain country of your holy presence. Let us drink from your swift river our true ecstasy. Refresh us, Christ, and bring us to the brink of that deep well where life itself is light and goodness more than we can dream or think flows from your plenteousness, from your delight in all your works, and where your loving kindness shines through our day and comforts us at night like soft wings safely overarching us, that we might put our utter trust in you and fret no more for passing wickedness. Psalm 36 by Malcolm Guite, talking about the beauty of the whole earth. Amen.